Supply and demand. Before I get into this one, I'm just going to say, I love the country I was born in, Canada. The biggest reason isn't because of Niagara Falls, the CN Tower, or the Canadian Rockies, of which embarrassingly I have never visited, at the time of this writing. The reason I love Canada isn't because I grew up in its biggest city, and know all its nooks and crannies. The reason I love Canada is because my mom lives there, my friends and family live there. I found the woman of my dreams there. That's the biggest reason Canada is the best country on earth. Another, perhaps not as important as the rest I mentioned, but still pretty important, is the fact that because I was born here in Canada, I can one day be Prime Minister. I believe in the institutions that are established here. They were long fought for to be put in place. Every election cycle I'll put in my ballot. Even if my candidate loses, I will understand the winner still loves Canada for their own different reasons, but there are fundamental ones I'm sure we agree on. Even though the Prime Minister may not be the one I voted for, doesn't mean I believe their government hates me. I don't believe that there will be a mob waiting outside my house because I voted wrong. That Prime Minister, that I may not have voted in, still loves maybe not me, in particular, but every Canadian. I'll just have to wait until the next cycle to try again. Perhaps by then I might change my mind. Now that I've put in this disclaimer, I'll begin. Inflation. The forces of supply and demand are the most pervasive forces in the universe. That may sound insanely sweeping and perhaps ridiculous. I'm going to go out on a limb, however, and declare with certainty that I'm right. How much would you pay for the air you breathe? You don't, do you? It's free. Not all air is free, however. The air inside your house is climate controlled. You pay your electric bill to make it so. The air outside, however, is basically free. The reason is, because the planet is full of it. There is an overabundance of free-flowing air in the world. The moment it becomes scarce, the cost goes up. That dynamic is found everywhere, including the money you use. It's a concept as old as time itself. For the time being, I'll focus on the here and now. The phenomenon of prices rising is inflation. This could happen in at least 4 ways that I know. They are what I will refer to on here as oversupply of money, decline in use of money, particular commodity scarcity, and all commodity scarcity. These 4 phenomena make up the data that is collected and presented as CPI, Consumer Price Index, and PPI, Producer Price Index. When there is an oversupply of money, and no increase in use, this causes prices wholesale to rise. It's a defense mechanism. Think of the central bank as a giant sponge, and the money supply is water. As the currency decreases in buying power, the central bank begins to suck up excess money in the supply to alleviate the loose funds. Higher interest rates also play into this. The decline in use of money is very similar to oversupply. However, it's not caused by the central bank printing too much, but by the general population declining in the use of the currency. In a properly run financial system, along with higher prices, the central bank would raise interest rates to alleviate the liquidity. This may not always work, however. If the population begins to literally burn the money, higher prices and interest rates can't fix that. The third way I know inflation occurs is when a particular commodity raises in prices faster than other commodities. The 2 off the top I can think of is housing and fuel. Just like with money scarcity, higher demand raises the value of these items. Scarcity can come in 3 ways: undersupply, overdemand, and inaccessibility. I'm going to refer to housing, although the examples I give will work just as well for fuel or anything else. If there are 1 million people looking for a home, and there are only 750,000 homes available, at least 250,000 people will have to remain living with their parents. However, before that decision is made, the market, which is people buying and selling, will decide what they can afford. In this scenario, the price for a home is excessively high. One reason for this is lack of new home construction. The other, I'll speak to later. If the numbers I supplied were reversed, the price for a home would drop drastically. This is all assuming, however, that everyone looking for a home can physically access every home. If there are 2 identical mansions in separate parts of your province, it could happen that one may be priced less than half of the other. The reason is because more people want to live in one than the other. The reasons for this could be as follows. The region with the cheaper home is less sought after. If more people in one region are looking for homes, the prices for those homes will rise. The particular reasons people favor regions differently vary widely, of course. One factor is accessibility. If one region is difficult to reach, not only will the population of that region be small, but there is a chance housing prices will be low. That's why the further away from a major population center you go, home prices begin to drop. This scenario resembles what most people in the economy experience. Now, in terms of all commodity scarcity, if the delivery system of goods and people fail, I'm including personal transport infrastructure as well, access to all the commodities surrounding the delivery would be affected. In this case, prices would rise across the entire economy. This would have nothing to do with an oversupply of currency, just an excessive demand for all commodities and undersupply. Another scenario would be, if prices of energy were to rise excessively, this would affect a wide variety of products and services in the economy, from transport, to real estate, to retail items. Now, the examples I just gave would most likely be in the event of a wide-sweeping disaster. What's more common, is particular commodity scarcity. One in particular that concerns me most, is housing. Later in this chapter, I'll explain the connection between housing prices and transport infrastructure. Sales tax and a little bit of income tax. Now, I'm getting into the real meat and potatoes of my essay series. I've explained a little bit about how interest rates soak up loose funds. I've also explained how taxes do the same. I haven't, however, explained too much about sales tax. How is the money that goes toward road maintenance allocated? I didn't bother surveying social media for an answer, because I can assume, however, the following. No one will answer because no one really cares. It's not a topic people think about. Most people assume that everyone's taxes are paying for everything evenly. That's just not true, but not in some sort of eat the rich sort of way. The vast majority of people also believe that the reason they pay taxes, especially sales tax, is because if they didn't, the government would collapse, or the park drinking fountains would stop working. As I said previously, the government doesn't need your money. You need the money the government supplies. I'll say it again. The government supplies the money. Take a break before reading or listening to the rest of this. Once you worked it out, and see that it's obvious, you can start the rest of your life. Now, road maintenance funding comes from people who pump gas. The reason is simple. People who pump gas are most likely using the road. The more you pump gas, the more you use the road. So, the more you use the road, the more your individual tax dollars go to paying for the road maintenance. Sounds simple. Sounds easy. It even sounds socially just. I can't believe I used socially just in a sentence, without implying I might barf soon. However, I did it. Let's just move on. Earlier in this chapter, in the segment, The Case for 1% Income Tax, I had the road tax in mind. If I were in power, instead of collecting taxes from people's pay, I would have it come from the product or service the public pay for. To me, it's more liberating for people when they pay taxes on things they choose to use as opposed to feeling they may be paying taxes towards something fundamentally against their morals. In my view, that could lead to a slightly less divisive populace. Again, this proposition wouldn't lead to funding loss in needed services. However, I realize not all sales tax connects logically to all services such as community centers or homeless shelters. Although I would assume property taxes would cover community centers and homeless shelters. In my proposed plan they would be funded directly from the government or another way taxes are used. So far, I've talked about how taxes are a form of income for provincial and municipal governments. I've also talked about how I plan to cut income taxes. Now, I want to talk about another thing taxes are used for. I want to get something a little clear for you. First, when I refer to taxes, I don't mean taxes throughout the ages. Money has changed form over the years. When I say years, I mean millennia. Also, the systems that control the flow of money have changed. Taxes now control the flow of money. They used to prop up governments, when money was actually physical metals or seashells. Now money is paper, or a mixture of impossible to fold plastics. The value of money now is based on how much you trust your government to be there next year. When I say taxes, I mean the tax system that is put in place now. Alright, taxes are used to modify the population's behavior. The reason cigarettes are so expensive, in Canada at least, is because there's a high tax on them, before you pay sales tax. The reason for that isn't because the government wants to make the poor old cigarette fiend poorer. It's because they want to make it harder for an addicted cigarette user to purchase cigarettes. If it's more expensive, they'll buy less by default. This is probably the primary reason for taxes in our contemporary world. Anytime you encounter a high tax barrier for a product or service, it's probably because the government wants to promote the declining use of a product or service. In contrast, when taxes are low, that means the government is actively promoting the use of a product or service attached to that tax. This goes back to supply and demand. If the barrier is too high, demand falters, and vice versa. Anyhow, back to what I was saying, in regards to taxes not directly connected to services. I'm not saying this is exactly what I would have done, but perhaps the tax revenue made from cigarette sales could go toward homeless shelters. Something like that example is how I would divert funds that used to come from income taxes to public services. There would have to be a giant study on the matter to see what fits. Perhaps in a later book, I'll have that laid out. One last thing before I finish with this segment. The reason I wouldn't drop the income tax of the rich to 1%, at least not at first, is for the same reason. Their tax rate is currently 40% or more. The government doesn't hate rich people because they think rich people would be delicious if they were eaten or something. It's because they're trying to modify their behavior. The government, by taxing the rich 40% or more, are encouraging the rich to put their money in loophole accounts. If the rich keep their money invested and safe, that helps the general population with loans. The national interest rate would be reasonable. The rich are already spreading the wealth. Those who keep propagating this misconception, that the rich are money-grubbing masses of dirty, disgusting people, are most likely themselves what they are accusing others of being. Also, I would bet the farm that they are being paid richly to keep up this toxic rhetoric, or they are immensely, and utterly, profoundly, stupid. They should have no place in governing others. My ears are ringing with the sound of someone saying, "What about capital flight? The rich hide their money in offshore accounts." I'll explain this in more detail in the segment following this one. For now, I'll leave you with this. Money cannot end up anywhere other than where it came from, and capital flight isn't money, it's people.